Bill McGowan, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Max, good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you. And you came out from New York, which is where I'm from.
I did, yeah, exactly. We traveled the same subway line.
We do, yes. The 456.
That's right, exactly.
Growing up in Murray Hill, you don't have many options.
No, you don't.
No, it's kind of sad. It's like either that or the bus.
Right, but you had a lot of movie theater options.
That's true.
In Murray Hill.
Kips Bay.
Yep.
Some good supermarkets.
Mm-hmm.
We got our own Fairway.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
I know. So,
well, I'm excited to have you out because speaking, communicating well, it's the gateway to everything good in life and everything bad if you're a poor communicator.
That's right. It's a high wire act. Right?
It is.
Yeah. It's, and this opportunity to persuade, influence, motivate, inspire people, it's a huge upside, and it's an opportunity that's just getting squandered every single day in companies all over the world.
What would you say are the biggest mistakes that people make in the corporate setting, but also then, after hours, out of the office?
I think people get stuck in this conformity zone where everybody in a company starts to talk like each other in very empty calorie kind of wording and cliche expressions and jargon. And they also take 3 times as long to say something that could have been said very succinctly. And
give me some examples of this jargon. Like, let's circle back.
Yeah, let's circle back. Let's unpack that. Let's double click on that. Let's, I think if we look at this from an intentionality perspective, like perspective and standpoint, if you hear those words coming out of people's mouths all the time, they are taking longer to say something than they need to. Well, let's look at this from a so-and-so standpoint, as opposed to just say, let's look at it this way.
It's like its own language. Like
it is.
Like I rarely use LinkedIn, but every time I log in, it's like that's all people are speaking in. It's like speaking in tongues in a way.
I think there was at some point, professionals who were not in law or medicine started to get this almost lexicon envy, where professionals in those fields had their own language that was specific to their skills. And it's almost what justified them charging what they charge and having this elevated stature where you really didn't question them. They were above reproach. And people in other professions just, I think, looked at that and thought, we need to have a lingo. We need to have something specific to the corporate world that makes us sound more intelligent. And so they started adding 2 and 3 syllables to every word, like even intentionality. Like, what happened to intention? That's a perfectly fine word. Or I heard someone the other day, I wish I could remember it was, it's escaped me now. I tried to block it out. It was so offensive, But words that there'd be a red line underneath it if you wrote it on your computer,
Like needlessly obfuscating language to try to appear qualified.
Right. Modernity. That was the word that I was thinking of. Modernity. And I actually had to stop the person and say, I don't think that's a word.
Wait, do you mean modernity?
Yeah, like modern or yeah. And so people need to just have an outside set of eyes and ears to say, this doesn't sound real. This doesn't, I like to think of it as, does this pass the dinner table conversation litmus test? Would you go out to dinner with a friend and say, so from a offspring perspective, let's talk about your kids, but first I want to just take a couple steps back and, do this first. It's this language that is just not real. We don't have real conversations in it. And that's why people tune it out.
Yeah. And ironically, it makes people less memorable.
Yeah.
Like it makes people not stand out at all, which I think it's safe to say I've never had like a real job, but I would imagine that even within the corporate environment, like standing out would be something that you'd aspire to, right?
Absolutely. So important. And now with everybody talking off the same playbook and using all this nonsense word salad language, the irony is it's so easy to stand out by just being simple and real and separating yourself from the pack. It's that conformity zone that people feel comfortable in because everybody else in the company is speaking like that. And I've had people that I've trained say to me, well, I worry that if I don't throw around this terminology and this jargon, that people will think that I don't know what I'm talking about. And I have to tell them, no, it's actually the exact opposite. If you refrain from all of those crutches that people lean on because they don't have the goods, you will seem like a person of greater substance.
It's super weird. I mean, I remember when I was writing the manuscript for my first book, I would occasionally use phrases that are common in everyday vernacular, but I would get when I would get notes from my editor, they would tell me, they would redline them, and they would say, we want to avoid cliches when writing, which is something that took me a little while to fully understand where they were coming from with that. But it's interesting that we know to avoid those kinds of communication traps in writing, but yet we're so willing to fall into those traps when speaking.
I don't know what it is. I think it's something that we've just heard over and over again, like the 4 things that all mean the same thing. We were talking about them earlier. Let's unpack that. Let's do a deep dive on that. Let's double click on that. Let's drill down on that. They all mean the same thing. And I'm not sure we're even really conscious that we're using it. They're just used so often and we hear them so often. But what can be a really good exercise if you're in a company and you have to listen to your colleagues present, which can be the bane of your existence, right, is make 2 columns on a page or on your tablet and jot down all the things that your colleague is doing that you've heard a million times that sound like every other presentation you've ever heard. And make another column for something they may be doing that's different, fresh, new, that seems to be grabbing your attention, something a little unorthodox, and make note of that. And obviously stay completely away from all the things that have been overused. And if some of the techniques you hear other people employing that grab your attention, that make you remember something a little deeper, and it fits your personality style, road test it. Try it out on your own the next time you have to present.
That's a great exercise. Are there parallels that you could draw from this corporate speak to the type of language that you see in academia, in culture today? Because I noticed, I'm not in the corporate world, but I did notice, and I posted about this on X recently, that there are phrases that the academic left, this isn't a political show, but the academic left tends to use phrases that I find unintentionally hilarious, which in my view do nothing more than signal moral superiority and end conversation. But like, I'll give you some examples. Do the work.
Yeah.
You hear that all the time from a certain cohort.
Right.
I'm deeply concerned, which in my view just sounds like you're trying to convey that you're morally superior. Your view doesn't matter.
There's something kind of patronizing about that.
Very patronizing.
Yeah.
Let's unpack this. Sit with that. Center so-and-so voices. Check your privilege.
Check your privilege.
Yeah. Full stop. Do better. So what you're saying is, so there's all these like phrases that stand out.
And they're phrases that the bottom line intention is for them to gain the upper hand in the conversation, to assert control over the other person. So what you're saying is, like, that is now taking the other person's idea and morphing it into what you want to maybe weaponize with them.
Exactly. It's like, get ready for a straw man of your argument. Yeah,
exactly. And there's a lot of that going on. I mean, all you have to do is listen to some of the representatives from academia testifying on the Hill. I mean, that was, one of the most sorrowful displays.
Are you talking about against RFK Jr.?
Yeah, and even further back, they did not do a really good job of communicating, which is ironic because they're in the world of education, and one of the great ways we teach people is through how we communicate to them. And I think too few people are investing in an analysis of whether the way they communicate is actually achieving what they're trying to accomplish. I don't think that enough organizations dedicate enough resources to really analyzing how do we as an organization and a culture communicate, and how can we do it better, because something in the neighborhood of $1.2 trillion in business is lost based on poor communication. And lots of surveys like the Harris survey and study found that leaders and their ability to communicate effectively is dropping. So this has become not just a good thing for people in business to have, it's a business imperative because it's directly tied to productivity, culture, people who feel as though communication is effective and concise in an organization. Their morale is better. They view the company they work for as more effective. It has these amazing ripple effects.
Yeah. To me, it's like using these phrases, it's less about conversation, more about a sort of moral performance.
Yeah. It is something that it's couched in what they think is subtlety by not being blunt and saying directly what they feel. But we live in a time where I think people have a growing appreciation for people who say things directly and aren't masking it in some kind of or obfuscating. They just want to be told directly what the other person is thinking and feeling.
Where do you think that comes from?
Probably from years of people being on message and crafting that message in a way that they communicate an idea, but they're checking all the boxes of where they don't want to be stepping. It's almost like walking through a minefield. Be careful not to say that because that could result in something bad happening. This idea of playing not to lose in communicating. And I think that what you're seeing more and more, sometimes for good, sometimes for not, is very blunt, direct communication coming back into the mix.
Are there any specific cultural catalysts that you think are playing a role here? I mean, like, is it podcasting? Is it sort of people becoming a little bit more jaded to the soundbite style of communication that we derived from traditional media for so many years?
Podcasting definitely has been the pin in the balloon of people being over-messaged. And 20, 25 years ago, the supremacy of the soundbite was unchallenged because that's all we got from people. Maybe they went on a show and for 3 minutes had not a lot of time to communicate something, so it had to be in sound bites. The rise of podcasting has really exposed people to, do you have insights and knowledge and a point of view, and what happens when you're in a conversation with somebody and you're not just leaning on, I got 6 sound bites I'm going to deliver, I'm going to find out some way to wedge them in. You have to really have the goods in this world where you're talking for 30, 40, 60 minutes.
It is interesting. I liken that sort of soundbite culture of yore to ultra-processed information.
Yeah.
We talk about like ultra-processed foods a lot on this show and how the overconsumption of those types of foods tend to lead to weight gain and metabolic dysfunction, all that stuff.
It's funny because there's a chapter in the book that makes that analogy between speaking and food.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and there's a chapter called The Verbal Diet. And the idea of it is, imagine if you went to a consultant and they said, all right, so on average, you speak about 16,000 words a day. Tomorrow, I'm cutting it back to 12,000. And imagine how much more selective you'd be about what it is you say to people and the way you phrase it, for fear that being sloppy and loose and droning on about things will leave you at 4 o'clock having used up all your 12,000 words, and now you can't communicate again until 12:01 when the allotment resets. And I firmly believe people would have a lot more intention in the way they communicate. So to extend the metaphor, these jargony words are, the GMOs of our language, and there are lots of parallels.
So conversely, if you want a message that you're conveying to stick in somebody's mind, what tactics might you adopt?
There's a chapter that I call The Magnificent Seven, And in my experience in coaching people over many, many years, there are 7 devices that I have found stick in people's minds. Analogy and metaphor are definitely one of them. I think when you can take a concept that may be foreign and unfamiliar to your audience and get them to understand it quickly by comparing it to something common to all of our experiences, I think you have the makings of something really valuable in communication. I was working with a group of hedge fund people a couple of years ago, and they were doing a panel conversation on Brexit. And it'd be kind of hard to be pithy about Brexit, given the topic. And this one guy said, well, listen, let's face it, before the last prime minister left office, she was the chess player only had the king left. And she was just moving it around one space at a time until she got checkmated. I can't say I remember who else was on that panel that day. I certainly don't remember what anybody else on that panel said, but I still remember that guy. Because for 10 seconds, instead of droning on with really dense, wonky information about, this policy, he gave me a 10-second mental refresh to visualize a chessboard and think about something other than the topic. And I found when I was done just having that diversion, I had a mental refresh, and now I was ready to re-engage with the topic that they were discussing. And it can be really effective. I was working with a logistics company, and they were trying to explain to a very mainstream media audience what the whole supply chain issue was about. And, what we had said was, at the height of the crisis, what we had really was a 6-lane freeway trying to merge into a 1-lane country road. And that's why everything was, tied up.
Good metaphor.
Yeah, nobody has ever tried to navigate ships coming into dock, but everybody has sat in that traffic, right? Everybody understands the frustration and the delays that come from squeezing into that tight merge. So these can be really good devices that people get quickly and understand, and also stimulate the visual side of our brain, because we do absorb information both visually and verbally. And so when I see people in a business setting who just have a slide deck going along with what they say, and it's just 8 bullets in blue or black lettering on a white background, my first reaction is you're forfeiting 50% of your opportunity to engage people and have them retain the information, because you're not stimulating the visual side of their brain.
I love that. I think it's probably also pretty useful, or at least it has been for me, like to be. Well, I would consider myself a storyteller. I'm very interested in and drawn into good storytelling. So I consume a lot of media as a result, whether it's TV shows, Game of Thrones. I just finished Daredevil Born Again, and I feel like Breaking Bad, there's always like anecdotes and allegories that you could draw from, like, as opposed to just lazily relying on an old cliche. Like,
yeah. I mean, when a show is really good,
yeah,
like Breaking Bad or Mad Men or Succession, I find I'm always referencing that. There's situations that come up in day-to-day life that remind me of plot devices from those shows.
Totally. Yeah, like, there are lines that stand out to me from Game of Thrones, for example. Like, I love which I've used, where, Baelish is in I forget the name of the main, wherever the Iron Throne is, but he's talking to the bald guy, and he's like, they're talking about chaos being a ladder. Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder. And it's like this allegory, this really powerful perspective shift on how to seize opportunity when it presents itself.
Yeah. Well, interesting. That winds up being one of the 7 devices that I talk about. Another one is what I call original definitions. So chaos is a ladder. That's an original definition. It gets you to think about something through a different lens than you typically have thought of. I heard one not too long ago about authenticity being the combination of passion and warmth. That wouldn't be the definition you'd see in the dictionary. Or we think of energy when people have to get up and speak. Energy would be defined in a very specific way, but we define it as your palpable enthusiasm for the value of the information you're sharing with people. And so, because that's the definition that helps us convey what we need to tell people. You have to lead by example. You have to show, I find this stuff interesting. And because if you don't lead by example, they are not going to follow you.
That makes sense. What are the attributes that make somebody a charismatic speaker?
Connection to the audience. I find that I immediately get turned off when I see somebody up in front of me who it just seems like they've pulled the presentation out of the drawer. It's the same exact one they gave last week. There's no connection to the audience. There's no sense of listening. When I have to present to a group of people, I try to show up an hour and a half, 2 hours before I'm going to go on, if there's lunch or breakfast that's serving. And I try to have as many 90-second conversations as I can with people and ask themselves and ask them, what would you like to come away with today? Like if you could, rub the magic lantern and the communications genie pops out, like what wishes would you want granted? And I find it's a great little mini focus group. I find it's an opportunity for me to come in. I think I've narrowed and tailored this talk to this group of people, but I can take it even further in terms of it being exactly what will be the most valuable for this group of people. And then it also gives me an opportunity maybe to reference that conversation in the talk. I was just talking to Robert, before we got going this morning. I was really intrigued to hear X, Y, and Z. It brings the audience and you together, and it shatters this barrier that can exist just at the foot of the stage.
Yeah, I gave a talk this past week, and I was because I'm very lucky. I get to fly all over, and I give talks, and I've got a speaking career of sorts. And somebody gave me this compliment when just after I had gotten off stage that I thought was really it was a really warm compliment. And they said that when I'm speaking on stage, I'm speaking in the same exact way and tone as if I would be speaking to you if we were at the bar together.
That is the best compliment you could possibly get. In fact, in a prior career, I used to host morning TV in New York. And but my day job, after I did that from like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., I would go and I'd be a producer at one of the shows at the networks. And this editor passed me in the hallway, and he said the exact same thing. He said, it's so refreshing. It's like I feel like the guy I'm watching as I'm getting dressed in the morning, same guy I'm passing in the hallway. And that winds up being that dinner table litmus conversation test. Would you talk to me this way if we were having a drink or dinner together? So important, and it's in such a scarcity in the business world.
Why do you think that is?
Because people mistakenly think that formality of language equals professionalism.
Totally.
And you have to be supremely confident to feel the license to be casual and conversational. I think it takes a while to get there. And if you watch especially younger people in an organization, they will shoot for bigger words and jargony words because they feel like that makes them the member of the club. And you look at Barack Obama, right? He's an incredibly smart guy, but he's so supremely confident that he's okay whittling it down to the simplest, barest bones idea he's trying to communicate.
So confidence.
Yeah. Confidence allows you to be casual.
And where does that confidence come from? I want to peel the layers of the onion back further and further because, I'm sure there are people listening to this who want to be appreciated and should be appreciated for the knowledge that they've accrued.
Yeah.
Right. So where do you think that confidence comes from?
Reps. First and foremost.
That's a great metaphor for this podcast in particular.
That's right. Definitely never saying no to an opportunity to get up and talk. And a lot of people fall victim to their own anxiety of public speaking, turning down invitations. You absolutely must say yes to every single one because every single one is a learning opportunity about what you want to do next time and what you don't want to do next time. I find that I really love the ones I do where I realize, oh, that totally didn't go the way I was thinking, and I'm never going to do that again. Something as simple as knowing where the glass of water is on the stage. I had this episode happen to me at this graduate class at NYU in New York where I was asked to come and talk, and something happened, something like flew down my throat, a piece of dust, and I started coughing uncontrollably to the point where I actually had to leave the room and go to a water fountain in the hallway because there was no water around.
In the middle of your talk?
In the middle of my talk.
Wow.
And so from that moment on, not only have I always insisted on knowing where the nearest bottle of water is, but with clients, I've said, especially at big events, we need to have a little lucite table, a couple glasses of water here. And they look at me funny, and I'll teach them that there's a way to drink on stage. And they'll say, "Oh, come on, stop it. I don't need to be taught how to drink." I say, "Well, have you ever seen the video of Marco Rubio, doing
Yes.
doing the reply to the Republican reply to the State of the Union? That's why you need to learn how to drink."
Wait, remind us what
Yeah,
happened.
well, he was on camera giving the speech, and he had run down to the studio, so he was all overheated, and the lights, and he was very hot, and his mouth got dry, and he tried to sneak a drink of water, like furtively grab it, sip it, put it back, like we're not going to notice that.
Yeah.
It was just the most bizarre behavior imaginable. So, yeah, but every speaking opportunity is an opportunity to learn something to do differently. And mistakenly, a lot of people, after they get up and present, will say to colleagues or friends, "How did I do?" Not the best question to ask, because people always say, "Oh, you're great. You're terrific," And you may have been, but that's a lie that's often told just to be supportive of each other.
Yeah, nobody's going to say you were terrible.
No.
Yeah.
And the better question to ask is, what would be 2 things I should do differently next time? Like really swing the door wide open to feedback and let them know, no, I really want to know because I'm trying to get better at this. Give me 2 things that I should do differently. And, everybody refines their abilities as they do it more and more and more. And of course, if you have nerves that affect your public speaking, those definitely dissipate a little bit. There's some tricks on how to, get over that anxiety. One of them is not picture the audience in their underwear. That's probably the worst piece of advice I've ever heard. But maybe what you do is you find 4 people in the room. Maybe there are 4 people around a conference table, or there are 4 people in an auditorium. And maybe you find one person in each quadrant of the room, near left, far right, near right. And you find the people who are what I call the good listeners, the encouraging nodders, smilers, the ones giving you that affirmation that this is interesting to them. And you just play to those 4 people. And no one in the audience is going to know that you're just having a conversation with those 4 people. It shrinks the audience. So you're not suddenly thinking about, oh my God, I'm talking to 500 people here. The other thing that does is it maximizes the likelihood that I will not make eye contact with the person who's sitting there like in the audience now with their thumbs about to short circuit because they're texting somebody. When I catch that out of the corner of my eye, it's a confidence killer. I think it's a confidence killer for anybody. So that's one thing that can bolster your assuredness as you go through it.
Yeah, I love the concept of doing reps. It's like I used to do music for a while, and I was and I didn't do it enough to get as good as I had wanted to be in the live setting. And one of the reasons for that is that every room sounds different. It takes a lot. It takes way more reps, I would say, playing and performing in different rooms because the way that sound bounces off each room and the way that it hits your ears when you're on stage, it can be very unsettling and jarring, and it can hearing yourself through that, which is really critical when you're trying to sing. Like it takes a lot of it takes many reps to get good at that.
And that's true of public speaking too.
Yeah.
If you get in, if everybody's having lunch get yourself into the auditorium if it's empty and stand on the stage, walk the stage, get a sense for how far the last row is, see what it feels like under the lights. You don't want to be contending with this foreign feeling experience when you're out there for real. You want to get a sense of your surroundings, not have it feel like it's something you haven't experienced before.
Yeah. Every PA sounds different.
Yeah, absolutely. Test out all the gear, the clicker, see if there's a teleprompter there, talk to the teleprompter. One other little trick is always get the name of the audio visual person at the convention.
Shout out to AV guys.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Exactly. They're going to make you look great. And because if for some reason something goes wrong, like let's say your clicker stopped working, you're able to say, hey, Dan, would you mind just flipping me another clicker? This one seems to be a little on the blink. As opposed to, I think something's wrong here. Tension in the voice, making that personal connection and breaking that wall with the production people sounds just a lot more confident, a lot more relaxed.
Oh, yeah. I've had many times where I get up and the clicker's not working.
Yeah.
But it's like you have to just take a deep breath and it's okay if you're it's not a big deal at all.
No, not at all.
'Cause shit happens.
Yeah.
Technology sometimes fails.
Yeah. I gave a talk at NBC one time and they insisted that they run my presentation out of their laptop. And of course, out of the corner of my eye, I see that the engineer is trying to pair the clicker with his computer. And I'm thinking, I know this process takes probably about 6 minutes, So it was like, okay, well, the deck's not up. Let's get going anyway. You just cannot. I don't know if you've ever seen the video of Michael Bay, the director, at CES one time. I think Samsung had hired him to come on stage and talk about their curved screen. And he comes out on stage and he starts talking and the teleprompter goes down. And he obviously didn't immerse himself in the subject matter to the point where he could kind of carry it a little bit. So he stops and there's a professional host on stage with him who thought, okay, well, the teleprompter, why don't you and I just do a chat, a little Q&A? And he started to answer the first question and then proceeded to abruptly stop and walk off stage.
Wow, no, I never saw.
Like one of the most shocking things you'll ever see. Just gave up in the middle. Didn't even try.
Wow.
Yeah. But that's, listen, the teleprompter will go down sometimes. Bill Clinton had a State of the Union speech in 1994, 95, where he's a couple minutes into the speech and he realizes the wrong version's been loaded into the teleprompter, not the final version. And everyone who was there that night had absolutely no idea because he was able to kind of riff and edit on the fly and adapt what was in the prompter to the final version that he knew was in his head. You can't do that unless you've done, 10,000 hours, 20,000 hours of this.
Yeah, I think you also just have to know your craft. You have to know your material front and back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's super important. Who do you think are the masters today of public speaking living among us? Who in the zeitgeist would you say is really nailing it?
Melody Hobson, who is the founder and co-CEO, or she might be the co-founder and CEO of Ariel Investments in New York. She was the chairwoman of Starbucks for a while. She's also married to George Lucas. And everything I've ever seen her do is exceptional. She's just a master at communicating, Melody Hobson. There's also an educational advocate named Jeffrey Canada, who has an education building dedicated to him in Harlem in New York. He's a master at communicating as well. But I can't say I've seen anybody in the current political environment who's terribly impressive. I think Obama has always been great. I saw an interview he did recently where I think it was at Hamilton College, and it was a fireside chat, and somebody asked him, what do you think of the most important skills when it comes to public speaking? And he said, number one, flat out, without a doubt, conviction. You have to speak with conviction and certainty if you're going to make your points land. And that's something, he was always very good at.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even if you're uncertain about a topic, you should project certain uncertainty.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly. A couple little things. People love to ask the rhetorical question in their presentations. So what are we going to do about this? And then they go on to answer it. And when I work with people who want to bolster their executive presence a little bit, their sense of gravitas, I say, well, first of all, everybody does the rhetorical question. So let's scrap that. Why don't you just say, now, here's what we're going to do about that. Just make it more of a declarative statement instead of a rhetorical question. And it makes you seem like you've got a plan, even if you go on to answer your own question. It just changes the dynamic. Also, another scourge that's really crept in is everybody saying, right, at the end of a sentence. It's almost like the Canadians say, eh, and Americans now say, right? And to me, what that indicates is an obsession on the part of the speaker to make sure that their point is validated. It almost seems like an insecurity thing, right? You're asking them for their buy-in after every sentence. And so I try to get people, if that's a habit, to break that as well.
I can be guilty of that.
I think we're all guilty. I'm guilty of filler language that I'd love to get rid of.
So am I.
Yeah.
What are your favorite filler words or phrases?
So are the first two words of just about every sentence today. And it's a very powerful thing to feel like you have the license to take a beat and a half before you begin speaking to select the first 5 words of what you're going to say. Instead of, I'm not thinking about those 5 words as I'm saying, I'm thinking about them in silence. And it also makes it seem as though you're being more selective about what you want to say. And selectivity is a sign of respect to your audience. It means I'm not just going to blather on and somewhere in here will be a valuable thought. No, I'm paring it down for you as I tell you, so there's no extraneous material here. But speed and filler language, there's a direct correlation between the two because our brains are about 600 milliseconds ahead of our mouth. And your brain is constantly in front. Think of it as like the lead car and your mouth follows along. And your brain is always coming up to these intersections where it's deciding, okay, here's the conversational road I want to go down. Here are the words I want to use to articulate that thought. And your mouth follows along. But we all know that your brain doesn't make those selections quickly and efficiently all the time. Sometimes you debate what you want to say. Sometimes there's a word retrieval issue. Can't find the right word. There are times where your brain comes to a complete stop. If you're speaking quickly, think of it as your mouth tailgating your brain. And when your brain stops, your mouth has to do something while it's waiting. Typically, that's where filler comes in. Filler is what your mouth does while it's waiting for your brain to coherently select the next thing to say. I worked with a woman not too long ago, and we feed the recordings of them communicating through this AI tool we use. And I thought she was speaking quickly, but I wanted to see just how quickly. So the AI tool told me that while 170 words per minute is the upper range of average, she was speaking 230 words per minute, well over the speed limit. Not surprisingly, in the course of a 90-minute conversation with her, she had said 326 times, and she had said 306 times. And that is just a product of runaway speed.
Yeah. Oh, man, I am very much guilty of the In fact, a couple months ago, I was interviewed by Jordan Peterson on his podcast. And I actually consider Jordan Peterson to be, regardless of what you think about his views, I think he's one of the greatest living public speakers. Mm-hmm. And somebody on YouTube, I love YouTube, somebody cut a reel of all of the times throughout the conversation that both Jordan and I said, and I'm going to play it for you here.
That's not such a nice thing to do.
No, I thought it was funny. I've got no qualms about. I mean, I'm fairly confident in my speaking ability, but here, let's see if I can play it. So somebody cut this from my recent.
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Right.
Somebody could almost make that like a song, like remix
Yeah.
that.
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Right.
So funny.
Like is another one.
Yeah.
The word said has disappeared.
What do you mean said?
Said. You and I would convey to someone, well, and then he said, well, what about how you use your hands? And I said, and he was like, how about use your hands? And I was like,
Oh,
that word like has substituted for said. And then of course it's also used as a filler. So it's really threadbare at this point. It's just being overused to the point of exhaustion.
I think that there's a happy medium where I don't think you need to, like, if you say it once or twice.
Oh yeah, that's totally fine.
Yeah, because I do think there is value in checking in with your audience. Like I'll do when I'm on stage speaking sometimes, I will actually stop and I'll be like to the audience, I'll be like, is this making sense so far?
Yeah.
And the audience loves when I do that, seemingly.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, I think there's,
I
there's
think
obviously like an
to have
overuse.
absolutely filler-free language is almost weird.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a little bit just makes it sound like this is how I talk at dinner.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for absolute purity. I'm looking for the filler not to be a distraction. If somebody in the audience is thinking, wow, that guy says, like all the time, then it's distracting from what I'm trying to do, and that's land of thought.
Right. What role does good listening play in communication, effective communication?
I don't think empathy is possible without good listening. And because the very intentional listening helps you understand what is it the audience wants from me. What do I need to deliver that's valuable for them? What's a good use of their time? Adam Grant has a good definition of empathy. He said it means you're not trying to manipulate the audience, you're trying to help the audience. And I agree with that every time you get up to speak, you want people to leave feeling, wow, that was really helpful. Like I really got a lot out of that. And I wish I could say that about the majority of presentations I hear, but a lot of it is just checking the boxes. I need to address this, I need to address that, but there's no overarching narrative about it. When I work with people in the corporate world on giving a presentation, what I find is it's usually a series of disjointed slides. 1 through 10, they're just bases they have to touch and boxes they have to check. When they change their mindset from just a series of necessary slides to this overarching story I'm telling, it really has a tremendous impact on just what kind of engagement am I going to get from my audience and what kind of retention am I going to get. If there's no narrative arc, then there's a problem. And most people would be well served in realizing that there is outweighed importance to how you start and how you finish. It's called this primacy recency effect.
Interesting.
Yeah, where they've done lots of studies that show that people tend to remember what you say in the first 5 minutes, and they tend to remember what you say in the last 5 minutes. So the positioning of something really important is crucial. Try not to put it in the middle because it tends to get lost. It's interesting because I saw this interview with Francis Ford Coppola, and this chapter in the book actually called the Coppola storytelling formula, where he was asked, do you have a formula for making a movie? And he said, well, I learned from the masters in Hollywood years ago that you should find your 3 best things and take your best thing and finish with it. Take your second best thing and lead with it. And then find some logical thematic place in the middle for your third best thing. And I've taken that advice that he has for filmmakers and have applied it to public speaking and presentations, because most people don't appreciate how important it is to hook your audience. Don't start with an agenda slide, whatever you do. That is just not a way to grip an audience. Start off with some kind of metaphorical story that somehow is tied to what it is you're there to talk about. And if the audience is sitting there thinking, wow, how's he going to get from like point A to point F? Like, this is totally, that's fine. That's a form of engagement. That little bewilderment works for you. Now you've got them mentally chewing on something, trying to figure it out.
What about starting with either a question or a mind-blowing fact?
I love that. I love starting with a mind-blowing fact, especially if it's something that's counterintuitive or completely unexpected. Especially if it points to a particular challenge or problem that needs to be resolved. I think that that's a great way to start. What was the other one you had?
Like a question.
A question? Yeah, I think that could be good. I think it's always tricky asking an audience to answer questions. It can possibly get the thing off to a little bit of a bumpy start because people are really reticent to be the ones to blurt out an answer.
Yeah.
In fact, I often tell clients that always come with your own first question when you take Q&A at the end of a talk, because oftentimes nobody wants to be the first. And there's that awkward point where you say, okay, great, happy to take any questions. Crickets, like nobody's volunteering. Let 2 beats go by, and then you can fill the silence by saying, it's interesting. Typically when I open the floor to questions, when I address this topic, I find the number one thing people are curious about is this. So you almost ask your own first question. And I have found that jump starts the Q&A. Now somebody's willing to kind of be the second person getting up and asking.
I do sometimes like to start with a question that I know that most people, if not everybody, can say yes to.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I will often in my talks, I'll say something like, has anybody in the audience ever went over to the freezer, taken out that pint of ice cream, expecting only to have a serving or two, a spoonful or two, and then before you know it, you're looking at the bottom of the pint?
That's great. That's great because that's not predicated on them really answering. It's predicated on them nodding in familiarity and acknowledgement.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, because also don't forget, you're setting a scene. You're helping them visualize something that's highly relatable, their own freezer, and everybody typically has ice cream in it, and they've all done that. So you're immediately establishing that relatable connection with your audience.
Yeah, and then I'll like raise my hand and I'll be like, I've done it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And now
there's no shame in the game.
That's right. And now you're making it okay for them to admit that I've done that too.
Yeah, it's great. I get like a laugh out of it. And it's deeply human, it's relatable, and it puts you on the same, because it's kind of awkward, like you're on a stage. But
yes.
I'm just a person. Like I just happen to be in this context on a stage speaking to an audience, but I'm just like all of the people who are listening to me.
I like that technique a lot better than self-deprecating humor, which I find has to be managed in very small helpings.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that oftentimes people go too far in the department of self-deprecation and then they undermine their authority and their credibility.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it has to be wielded with finesse.
It's
a little bit goes a long way.
Like they heard somewhere that self-deprecating humor is endearing, but they just took it
too far, and then it almost starts to smack of false modesty, which I know we all hate.
Hate it.
I'd rather somebody be even slightly a little arrogant than falsely modest.
I hate false modesty and I hate false piety.
Yeah.
I hate both of those things.
Yeah. Well, it's very preachy. It's not something that endears you to the audience.
Yeah. So your background is you work with Fortune 500 companies, you coach executives, CEOs,
athletes, musicians, pretty much the gamut, and startups, people who are just getting started. We work in a nonprofit capacity with young kids who need to be able to express themselves, whether it's college interviews, maybe they're the first in their family going to college. They're going to have to tell their story to people who are going to decide whether to admit them or not. So we do a lot of that work as well. In fact, I'm working this week, Friday, with Angela Duckworth, who wrote Grit. And she's got a class at Wharton, an MBA class. And she assigned to them this project that she and I thought about. She's asking her students to get up and tell their life story in 60 seconds. And which a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm not sure that's a skill I'm going to need. It absolutely is. It is where you go when somebody says, tell me about yourself. And I have seen more people stumble and fumble through the tell me about yourself question than almost anything. And so we're going to...
What are the biggest mistakes that people make?
Name, rank, and serial number. Just very dry, as if they're reading off their CV. Well, I grew up in there, and then I went to this school, and then it is not meant to be that. It's meant to be, here's what drives me. Here's a story from some point in my life that represented maybe an epiphany or a revelation that I have a aptitude for this or I have a passion for this. And this episode, this story kind of pointed that out to me. And ever since then, I've drawn tremendous sense of worth and purpose pursuing that.
To tell a story.
Yeah, tell a story. Right. So for me, I used to have this couch in my office at CBS, and my colleagues would come by, they'd kind of defeatedly plop onto the sofa and they'd say, oh, I'm having this really hard time with this person. Can you give me a suggestion of like how I should talk to this person? And this is when I was producing TV. I wasn't in this line of work at all. And I would give them the finessed, wordsmithed way of communicating what needed to be said in a way that kept them away from the third rail and didn't exacerbate the situation. And they'd bolt up from the sofa and say, oh, so helpful. Thank you. I'm gonna do it. And that was probably my first inclination that I had an ability to help people express themselves in a way that yielded good outcomes. And so for my own 60-second life story, that would be the focal point of what I drive to.
Well, this is all very useful, not just for people who are currently employed, but also for those seeking employment.
Yeah.
Like I would imagine if you give a boring job interview, like tell me about yourself is probably one of the, I've never had a real job interview, so I don't know. But I hear it from my brothers all the time. They're in that corporate sort of hamster wheel.
Yeah. Because it might sound like a lazy question by the interviewer, but it's not. Sometimes the simplest question is the most difficult because you're almost paralyzed from the sheer choice of where you can take this thing. And it's really important to go into any of these situations, whether it's a job interview or something else, with a clear game plan of when I get asked, so what's new? Or how you doing? Or tell me about yourself. It's so open-ended that you need to have a clear idea of specifically where you want to take that.
I had an experience this past weekend where I was at this event, the Health Optimization Summit in Austin, and there was a moment where I meet 1,000 people over the course of a weekend, but there was somebody who kind of cornered me, and he was very friendly, and I was commensurately friendly in return. And but then he launched into this pitch, which is actually not that unusual. Like I often will get pitched products, but there was a real profound, palpable lack of emotional intelligence where I was like, it was just going on and on and on. I was like looking at my watch. I started like looking around, and he kept going. And there's just like a lack of self-awareness that some people have, and you can't be rude in that moment. But how, I mean, for anybody who might be prone to not reading the room, like, is there like a check engine light or a, some sort of self-inventory
it's
that one might do?
When you encounter that, it's an interesting strategy to think, just stop them, like touch them on the arm and say, let me have you hit the pause button 1 second. Your goal is to make this thing you're pitching to me appealing to people, right? Let me give you some strategy as to how I think you could be better at that. Instead of saying, buddy, I've heard enough, I got to go. You actually take the opportunity to point out to them, this isn't really working. And if it's not working for me, it's probably not working for a lot of people. I can help you get over this little speed bump. And I think people automatically think it's rude, but sometimes I'll say that to customer service reps I get on the phone. And I'll say, I know you're really trying to help me here, and I really appreciate that. I think for your line of work, what could be really helpful is if you stopped and really listened to the full situation, the person, instead of talking over them. I think you'll get better reaction. I think you'll get better ratings when people are asked to give you 5 stars. You always make it seem, and it should be, that you're doing it for their benefit. That can be helpful, I think. But you're really asking, like, how do I, as the person who's now gone off the deep end, how do I read your looking around and looking over my shoulder? And ultimately, you have to have a certain amount of self-awareness, right, to realize that, wow, this isn't working. But everybody runs the risk of overstaying their conversational welcome. They basically do. And it's so important to embrace this idea of less is more. And not only will people feel as though you're respecting their time, but they'll attach greater intelligence to you because you don't drone on and on. There's a great movie from years and years ago called Being There. It's with Peter Sellers, who played the Pink Panther years ago, and Shirley MacLaine. And it's this screwball comedy where this guy, Peter Sellers, is the landscaper on this huge mansion estate. And he is basically a simpleton. And he is somehow confused with the heir to the fortune. And he is now playing the role of the billionaire. And everybody believes he really is the billionaire who's this self-made man and has built this massive fortune because he barely talks. He barely says anything. He utters one sentence here and one sentence there, and they attribute this immense wisdom and gravitas to him because he barely speaks. And it's a funny movie, but there's so much truth in that the person who is able to communicate the most succinctly does appear to be not only the most respectful of somebody else, but also has the wherewithal to boil it all down and have it be effective and concise.
I love that. Yeah. I think I grew up, my parents always, it was just something in my house. Like, you grow up with everybody grows up with a different set of values and tropes that are sort of echoed throughout time. And for me, like, overstaying your welcome was something that was always like, I've always had this fear of overstaying my welcome or of being too much. And yeah, so I'm, so the idea that somebody might perceive me as being like long-winded or droning or whatever, it's, I'm hyper aware. Like, I don't want to, like, I'll give you what I think you need to convey an idea, but then I'm out.
Yeah.
But I feel like other people don't have that kind of.
If you have a close friend who you spend a lot of time with, or a spouse, you need to give them complete license to, hey, if you think I'm droning on here, just like rub me in the middle of the back. That'll be my sign of like, let's get going. And you need to, if you don't have that self-awareness, try to rely on somebody who can at least get you acclimated to knowing when you've overstayed your welcome.
Yeah. Such good advice. Well, this is super important. I mean, the art and science of effective communication, I mean, it's more important now than ever before. So I applaud you for doing what you do. I'm super excited to dive deeper into the book. Great. I've got just one last question for you, but before we get to that, where can people pick it up? Where can they find you on social media, et cetera?
You can find the book at claritymediagroup.com/speak memorably, which is the name of the book. And I do spend, people tend to interact with me on LinkedIn a lot because it is a business tool, but I'm also on X at Bill McGowan 22 and not so much on Facebook anymore, but
who is though?
Who is? Right?
Yeah.
Instagram at WJM2. And the book was a real labor of love. I had a book 10 years ago called Pitch Perfect, which was about how you communicate in any situation. You know, you have to talk your boss up at a party. You have to give a toast at a wedding. You have to give a eulogy. The book was very much about that. This is about how do you make your voice rise above the din of lots of talking, saying very little, conformity zone, bland, boring, forgettable kind of business talk. How do you rise above that so that what you say has more impact? That is the real goal of this book. How are you going to do that in the age of AI? You know, coming at us at warp speed. How do you do it on virtual calls? So there are lots of different scenarios. How do you use humor? How do you make sure that empathy and likability work in your favor? So it examines all those things.
Have you noticed that there's been a resurgence of the word slop, like AI slop?
I actually have not encountered that.
Yeah,
it's meant to be just this mishmash.
Yeah, just like algorithm chasing.
Oh yeah,
low signal, high noise.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a visceral word.
I know I'm going to hear it 10 times now the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So is there business talk slop out there?
It's like corporate speak slop is how I was like thinking about it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like verbiage that is really there just for moral signaling and for conspicuous, like more so for the speaker to derive something from the audience as opposed to any real connection with whoever that person is speaking with.
Yeah. There's a lot of self-centered communicating going on out there.
Yeah, totally. It's for the likes.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
The social media likes, but also in the workplace, the social brownie points.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, again, super cool stuff. Last question that gets asked to everybody on the show is, what does living a genius life mean to you?
What is what?
Living a genius life.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think living a genius life means that you are never content to stop and think that you're in that genius category, that you are relentlessly in pursuit of what really smart, insightful people have to add to help you develop a point of view that is based in either science or the findings of expert people, and trying to improve yourself by understanding who are the real smart authorities on all of these different subjects, whether it be cooking, music, wellness, whatever it may be, and ascertaining that that's the guidance I want to be following, and I want to absorb as much information as I can.
Yeah, amen. Love that.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Max.
Of course. Thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones that may benefit from it, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.